So, Senator Whitehouse, am I right to say that you're trying to draw a straight line? I know you've thought about Citizens United and corruption and big money and dark money as much as anybody. And you're trying to draw a line between those conversations about disparate influence by big money and corruption, tying that to the kind of 5-4 Citizens United bloc, tying that to the conversation both about the McConnell obstruction and to Gorsuch. Is there also a filament of this that is tying that whole big money corruption, drain the swamp conversation to Donald Trump himself?
I think it's a little hard to establish that. To me, the thing that is the huge flashing billboard right front and center is the past record of the court with a 5-4 Republican majority. Election law, they were 6-0 favoring Republican interests against Democratic interests at the polls. In cases where it was obvious that they were favoring Republican interests at the polls when they made the decision. In cases that pit corporations, particularly really big corporations, against human beings, it is 17-0 in favor of corporations in those 5-4 decisions. Whether you're a consumer, whether you're an employee who's been discriminated against, whether you're a union member, across the board, they have come down unanimously in these 5-4 decisions every single time. 6-0 in elections, 17-0 in conflicts between corporations and humans on the side of the Republicans and the big corporations. And when you look at the way big corporations fund the Republican Party, that makes a kind of sordid triangle of influence.
And I think it's probably fair to say we don't know too much from Gorsuch, at least from his record that I've seen, about where to locate him on the Citizens United question.
Oh, I think it's pretty clear. He wrote an opinion in the Hickenlooper case in the 10th Circuit, where I'm going to get lawyerese now, but he basically said that strict scrutiny was likely required for any law that tried to impede the fundamental right to give money to politicians. So strict scrutiny is, as some people have said, strict in theory, fatal in fact. And it signals, I think, pretty strongly that when it comes down to the interests of money trying to apply influence to elections and the defense of honest elections against that influence, he's going to come down on the side of the influencers.
And I guess the one thing we can stipulate, you and I, is that one of the most universally hated decisions to come out of the Supreme Court was Citizens United, right? I mean, this crossed ideology and political partisan lines. I mean, I think like 85% of Americans think it's a horrible decision, and it's spattered onto the reputation of the court in such a way that by 9-1, Americans think that a corporation is likely to get a fairer shake from the Supreme Court over a human being rather than vice versa. That's not a good place for the Supreme Court to be. So, Senator, let's go back to 1971 and the so-called Powell memo. And this is written before Lewis Powell is on the Supreme Court. He's worked at Philip Morris. He's a successful corporate lawyer. And he more or less writes what becomes the blueprint for corporate takeover of the judicial system. And it becomes kind of the scaffolding under which the American conservative legal movement is born and spawns think tanks and spawns the Heritage Foundation and spawns American Legislative Exchange Council. Alec, this is all a plan. And Lewis Powell dreamed it up one night. Is it your contention that the 5-4 Roberts Court that you're describing, that is at the heart of Citizens United, it's at the heart of McCutcheon, the heart of Hobby Lobby, is just the full flowering of that Powell memo, and that whatever this court is doing right now, it looks a lot less like doing justice and a lot more doing favors for big business?
Absolutely. I think that it has been the stated intention of the Republican Party for decades to accomplish that, and it goes back to the comment in the Powell memo that an activist court could be the strongest tool for the corporate community. And it's not just me who's noticing this. All of the three major court watchers have observed the same thing. Jeffrey Toobin saying that Chief Justice Roberts has served the interests and reflected the values of the contemporary Republican Party. Norm Ornstein talking about the new reality of today's Supreme Court, that it's polarized along partisan lines in a fashion we have never seen. And Linda Greenhouse, after much, concern and she agonized about this and finally said, "I'm finding it impossible to avoid the conclusion that the Republican-appointed majority is committed to harnessing the Supreme Court to an ideological agenda."
So let me ask you this question, which plagues me as I prepare to think about these hearings. What has been not a useful framing, in my view, is this language of Judge X is out of the mainstream. There is this mainstream, and, whether it's Elena Kagan on the one side or whether it's John Roberts on the other, there seems to be a presumption there that we all agree what the judicial mainstream is.
Yeah.
And
everybody brings their own mainstream to the debate.
There ain't no mainstream. If there ever was, it's gone. And so I'm trying to think about how this language of what is the infirmity that, in your view, Judge Gorsuch, who, lots of people are going to get up and say he was the best boss ever. I clerked for him. He's a good man. He loves his kids. How do you respond to this discourse of what is the mainstream? There are no goalposts here. What are we really talking about?
I think we're engaged right now in this country in an epic battle between special interests, which have, to an unprecedented degree since before Teddy Roosevelt, captured the institutions of government and frustrated the American public, which to a significant degree is taking out their frustration on the host, the government, rather than the virus, the corporate influence, and that this has actually infected the Supreme Court to the point where you get these 5-4 decisions that make what would have seemed to other courts to be extraordinary calls in favor of the big special interests. And the question which side of that fight he's going to be on is terribly important, not only to individuals who are usually the losers when the special interests prevail, but also to structuralists and to lawyers who think that the court should actually be a neutral, independent, and dispassionate body rather than something where you can go in and based on who you are, you can predict whether you're going to win or not one of these 5-4 decisions. That just can't be right.